A dangerous encounter. The city lights shimmered in the distance, casting an eerie glow on the wet pavement as Judge Alexandria Carter drove home. She had spent the last 12 hours presiding over a grueling case, one that tested both her patience and her faith in the justice system. The exhaustion weighed on her like a lead blanket, but she pressed on, eager to retreat into the solace of her quiet home. A soft jazz melody played from her car speakers, offering a brief respite from the chaos of her day. She exhaled deeply, gripping the wheel with steady hands. The road was nearly empty, a rare stillness settling over the streets as she approached a familiar intersection. That's when she noticed the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her stomach twisted into knots. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't run a light. There was no reason for a traffic stop. Yet, as the sirens wailed behind her, she knew she had no choice but to pull over. Judge Alexandria Carter had spent years advocating for justice, fighting against corruption within the legal system. But even she wasn't naive. She had seen the headlines, heard the stories. She knew that for a black woman alone on the road at night, an encounter with the wrong officers could turn into something much worse than a routine stop. With slow, deliberate movements, she eased her car to the curb, placing both hands on the wheel where they could be seen. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took steady breaths. The approaching footsteps were heavy, authoritative. Then, the sharp voice cut through the night air. "Step out of the vehicle." There was no introduction, no explanation. Alexandria hesitated, glancing at the side mirror. Two officers stood outside her car, their hands hovering near their holstered weapons. The taller one, Officer Daniels, had a cocky stance, his lip curled in impatience. The other, Officer Miller, looked less sure of himself, but he didn't question his partner. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Alexandria inquired, her voice steady, controlled. Daniels scoffed. "Did I stutter? Get out of the car. Now." Her pulse quickened. She knew her rights, but she also knew how easily those rights could be ignored. Swallowing her frustration, she reached for the door handle. "Slowly," Miller warned. She complied, stepping out into the cool night air. The street was empty, the flickering streetlights offering little comfort. She kept her posture calm, refusing to let fear dictate her movements. "Hands on the hood," Daniels ordered. Alexandria's jaw tightened. "Officers." Daniels didn't let her finish. He grabbed her arm, yanking her forward. She stumbled against the car, the cold metal biting into her skin. "Hey," she protested. "There's no need for that. You drive a car like this, but your plates come back with a flagged status," Daniels sneered. "Suspicious, don't you think?" Alexandria's eyes narrowed. She knew her vehicle was registered in her name. There was no way it was flagged. They were fishing. "I'm Judge Alexandria Carter," she stated firmly. "You're making a mistake." Silence. Then laughter. Daniels exchanged a smirk with Miller. "Judge, huh? That's a new one. Usually, they claim to have a cousin in the department. But you." He let out a low whistle. "That's a good one." Miller shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should run her ID first." "Shut up, Miller," Daniels snapped. "She fits the profile." Alexandria's stomach turned. "Profile? You know, flashy car, late at night, wrong neighborhood," Daniels said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Could be a stolen vehicle, or maybe you're transporting something you shouldn't be." Her hands clenched into fists. "My vehicle is registered to me. Run my plates again." Daniels ignored her, reaching for his radio. "Suspect detained," bringing her in for questioning. Suspect. The word hit her like a slap. She had prosecuted criminals. She had defended the law. And now she was being treated like one. "You're under arrest," Daniels declared, snapping handcuffs onto her wrists before she could react. "You have no right to do this," she hissed, twisting in his grasp. "This is unlawful." Yeah, Daniels muttered, shoving her toward the squad car. "Tell it to the judge." The irony stung. They forced her into the back seat, the door slamming shut with finality. Alexandria's breath came in short bursts as the reality of her situation set in. They hadn't even read her rights. They had no probable cause. And yet here she was. The squad car pulled away from the curb, its flashing lights bouncing off the buildings as they drove toward the precinct. Daniels chuckled from the front seat. "You're real quiet now, Judge," he mused. "Not so tough, huh?" Miller remained silent, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than before. Alexandria forced herself to breathe. She had fought cases tougher than this. She had seen injustice firsthand. But now she was the one behind the bars. They arrived at the station, where the night shift barely spared her a glance. She tried to explain, tried to demand her phone call, but Daniel shoved her forward, leading her through the booking process like any other criminal. "You'll spend the night here," he said smugly. "Maybe next time, you'll think twice about giving cops attitude." Alexandria's nostrils flared, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she held her head high, meeting his gaze with unwavering defiance. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice cold. Daniels only laughed, stepping away as the steel door to the holding cell slammed shut. As Alexandria sat on the hard bench, the weight of the situation pressed down on her. She didn't have her phone. No way to contact anyone. The hours stretched painfully long, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Then, just before dawn, the door creaked open. A senior officer stood there, his face pale as he stared at her. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by horror. "Judge Carter," he breathed. She rose slowly, arms crossed. "Took you long enough." The officer turned on his heel, barking orders down the hall. Within minutes, she was being escorted out, her record wiped clean. But the damage was already done. By the time she walked out of the station, the sun was rising. Alexandria's jaw clenched as she stared at the city skyline. She wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. Not ever. And by the time she sat behind the judge's bench again, she knew exactly how she would deliver justice. The officers who had mocked her, humiliated her, arrested her unlawfully, would soon stand before her. But this time, they wouldn't be holding the power. She would, and justice would be served. The reckoning begins. The morning after her unlawful arrest, Judge Alexandria Carter sat in her office, staring at the stack of legal documents in front of her. The weight of last night's injustice pressed on her chest like a vice, but she refused to let it consume her. She had been humiliated, mocked, and treated like a criminal in the very system she had dedicated her life to upholding. The two officers who arrested her, Daniels and Miller, had abused their authority, and Alexandria knew one thing with certainty: there would be consequences. A sharp knock at her door broke through her thoughts. "Come in," she called, straightening in her chair. Her clerk, Mary Thompson, stepped inside, her face a mix of relief and barely contained fury. "Judge Carter," she began, voice tight, "I just heard what happened. Are you okay?" Alexandria exhaled slowly. "I'm fine, Mary. But this isn't over." Mary nodded, her expression dark. "You should see this." She set a tablet down in front of Alexandria and pressed play. A grainy video filled the screen, cell phone footage taken by a bystander. It showed Alexandria standing outside her car, her hands raised as the two officers shoved her against the vehicle. Their words were muffled, but the sneering tone was unmistakable. "Yeah, right, lady. You're a judge, and I'm the damn president." The video cut to Alexandria being forced into the back of the police car, her face tense but defiant. Then, a second video popped up, inside the station. Someone had recorded Daniels laughing as he leaned against the front desk. She really thought she could talk her way out of it. "I'm a judge," she said. Puffed. Thought she was better than us. A slow, burning anger built in Alexandria's chest. She turned off the screen. How many people have seen this? Mary hesitated. It's spreading fast. Social media, local news, even some national outlets. People are furious. They're calling for an investigation. Good. Alexandria tapped her fingers on her desk. I need you to schedule an emergency session. I want this case on my docket immediately. Mary blinked. You mean? Yes, Alexandria said, her voice like steel. I want Officers Daniels and Miller in my courtroom by the end of the day. Mary didn't hesitate. Consider it done. As her clerk rushed out, Alexandria leaned back, fingers pressed together in thought. This wasn't just about what happened to her. This was about every person who had been stopped, harassed, and mistreated by officers who thought they were above the law. By the time the afternoon sun hung high in the sky, Daniels and Miller were seated at the defense table in Alexandria's courtroom. The courtroom showdown. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Spectators filled the seats. Reporters, activists, members of the legal community, and everyday citizens who had heard about what happened. The air was thick with anticipation. The bailiff stood. All rise for the Honorable Judge Alexandria Carter. The heavy doors behind the judge's bench swung open, and Alexandria stepped forward, her black robe billowing as she ascended the bench. The weight of the moment settled on her shoulders, but she embraced it. This was her domain. She took her seat, leveling her gaze at the two men before her, Daniels and Miller. They looked different now. Gone were their smug expressions, their unchecked arrogance. Now their hands fidgeted, their postures tense. They knew they had made a mistake. Officers Daniels and Miller. Alexandria began, her voice slicing through the silence. It seems today you find yourselves on the opposite side of justice. Daniels shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. Miller, his face pale, swallowed hard. You are both facing charges of unlawful detainment, misconduct, racial profiling, and abuse of power. Alexandria's tone remained cool, controlled. Do you understand the severity of these accusations? Miller nodded hesitantly. Daniels, however, stiffened. Your Honor, he began, his voice laced with nervous defiance. This is just a misunderstanding. We were doing our jobs. Alexandria cut him off with a sharp look. Was it part of your job to ignore my rights? To mock my credentials? To treat me as if I were guilty before even verifying my identity? Daniel's mouth opened, then shut. She continued. You were caught on video dragging me out of my car, laughing about my protests, and locking me up without cause. Do you deny this? Miller shook his head slowly. Daniels hesitated, then muttered, No, Your Honor. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Alexandria leaned forward. Tell me, officers, how many times have you done this before? How many innocent people have you humiliated and arrested simply because you assumed they didn't belong in certain places? Neither answered. I'll tell you how many, she continued. Since the footage went public, dozens of complaints have surfaced against you. People who were too afraid to speak out before, until now. Daniel's face twisted in frustration. With all due respect, Your Honor, you're making this personal. Personal? Alexandria raised a brow. This isn't about me. It's about justice, something you both seem to have forgotten. She let the silence settle before turning her gaze to the prosecutor. Proceed with the charges. The prosecutor stood, his expression grim. Your Honor, we have evidence that Officers Daniels and Miller engaged in racial profiling, unlawful detainment, and falsification of police reports. Furthermore, dashcam footage shows their repeated use of excessive force against minorities in traffic stops. Gasps filled the room. Alexandria nodded. Present the evidence. The courtroom lights dimmed, and a video played on the large screen. It showed dashcam footage, not just of her unlawful arrest, but of other incidents. People being stopped, dragged from their cars, handcuffed without cause. It was damning. Daniel's face paled. Miller's hands trembled. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. Alexandria let the moment hang before speaking. Officers, you swore an oath to uphold the law. Instead, you abuse your power. Now you will answer for it." She turned to the prosecutor. "I want a full investigation into every case they were involved in. If they wrongfully arrested even one person, I want their records cleared. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," the prosecutor said. Daniel's last shred of bravado crumbled. He looked up at Alexandria, his expression desperate. "Your Honor, please." She raised a hand, silencing him. "You will have your chance to explain. But you will not talk over me in my courtroom." Her gaze swept over the room. "This hearing is far from over. I will ensure that justice is served, not just for myself, but for everyone who has suffered at your hands." With a firm crack of her gavel, Alexandria cemented the beginning of what would become one of the most historic cases in the city's history. And as she looked at the men who once thought themselves untouchable, she knew one thing for certain. They would never forget the day they found themselves at the mercy of Judge Alexandria Carter. Unraveling the system. The courtroom had barely settled from the shock of Alexandria's rulings when the real storm began to brew. The weight of Daniels and Miller's misconduct was just the tip of the iceberg. There was more. Far more. Alexandria knew the two officers weren't acting alone. Corruption like this wasn't the work of a couple of bad cops. It was a system. A structure designed to keep people like her in check, to remind them that no matter how much they achieved, they were still at the mercy of those who wore the badge. And that system was about to crumble. She wouldn't stop until it did. A shattered illusion. That evening, Alexandria sat in her office, her fingers gripping a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Across from her sat Agent Vanessa Caldwell of the FBI, a seasoned investigator with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "This case is bigger than I thought," Caldwell admitted, setting down a file thick with documents. "We've been watching the department for a while. Your arrest was just the catalyst we needed to go deeper." Alexandria frowned. "How deep are we talking?" Caldwell leaned forward, her voice low. "Judge Carter, what if I told you Daniels and Miller were small players in a much larger operation?" Alexandria felt a chill. "Operation?" Caldwell nodded. "There's a network in the department, officers handpicked to target people in certain areas. They use vague laws as an excuse to harass, detain, and intimidate civilians who they believe don't belong." Alexandria clenched her fists. "And their superiors allow this?" Caldwell exhaled. "Allow it? They orchestrate it. We've got evidence that Deputy Chief Garner is the ringleader. But he's careful. He doesn't leave a trail." The name Deputy Chief Garner sent a spike of unease through Alexandria. She had seen him at community events, shaking hands, smiling for cameras, pretending to be a leader for all. And now she knew it was all a lie. "You said he doesn't leave a trail," Alexandria mused, her mind already calculating her next move. "But everyone makes mistakes." Caldwell smirked. "Now you're thinking like an investigator." She tapped the folder in front of her. "We have recordings, anonymous sources who've worked under Garner. But we need more. We need a way to pin him." Alexandria's mind was already racing. She wasn't just going to expose Garner. She was going to bury him. A sudden threat. The next morning, as Alexandria stepped out of her home, two armed officers flanked her, a new security detail assigned by the FBI. The city had erupted in support and outrage. News reports dissected every angle of the case. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding justice for every person wrongfully targeted by corrupt cops. And then there were the threats. She received them hourly, anonymous calls. Letters slipped under her office door, even a dead rat left outside her home with a note attached. "Stop now or end up like the others." The others. It wasn't an empty threat. As she climbed into the black SUV waiting outside, Mary, her clerk, rushed toward her, phone in hand, her face pale. "Judge Carter, you need to see this." She held up the screen. Alexandria's stomach dropped. It was a news article. The headline read, "High-ranking officer found dead amid corruption scandal." The picture was of Detective James Ramos, one of the men Caldwell had suspected knew too much. His body was found in his apartment. Gunshot wound, labeled as a suicide. Alexandria's hands tightened into fists. Ramos hadn't killed himself. He had been silenced. Garner strikes back. Back at the courthouse, Alexandria's courtroom was buzzing. The trial against Daniels and Miller was in full swing, but the atmosphere was charged with a deeper sense of urgency. Garner wasn't just covering his tracks. He was making sure that anyone who could take him down was eliminated. As Alexandria presided over the next phase of the hearings, she noticed something strange. Miller was restless. His fingers drummed against the table, his eyes darting between the audience and his attorney. He was scared. Something had changed. "Officer Miller," Alexandria called, her voice drawing the room's attention. "You've been unusually quiet. Do you have something to say?" Miller's mouth opened, then closed. Sweat dotted his forehead. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering something. But Miller was already shaking his head. "No," he said, his voice hoarse. Alexandria narrowed her gaze. "Are you certain? Because it seems to me that you're suddenly having second thoughts about your defense." Miller hesitated again. Then, for the first time since the trial began, he broke. I need protection," he blurted. "I want a deal." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, murmurs. Daniels whipped around to face his former partner. "Shut up, Miller," he hissed. "Don't do this." Miller ignored him. His hands trembled as he turned to his lawyer. "I want to talk. I'll tell you everything." Alexandria's pulse quickened. This was it. She glanced at Caldwell, who nodded, already on her phone, likely alerting her team. "Officer Miller," Alexandria said, her voice calm but firm. "You understand that coming forward now means admitting your own involvement." "I don't care," Miller muttered, rubbing his forehead. "They're going to kill me anyway." A cold silence settled over the room. They, not just Garner. There were others. "Then let's start from the beginning," Alexandria said, leaning forward. "Who gave the order to arrest me?" Miller's lips parted, but before he could answer, a gunshot rang out. Screams. Chaos. People ducked under the benches. The bailiffs rushed forward, drawing their weapons. Alexandria's heart hammered. Miller slumped forward, his eyes wide in shock. A dark stain spread across his chest. Someone had shot him. Alexandria barely had time to react before a second shot rang out, hitting a bailiff. "Get down," Caldwell shouted, pulling Alexandria from the bench and shielding her. The courtroom doors burst open as officers stormed inside, weapons drawn. People screamed, rushing toward the exits. "Sniper!" someone yelled. Alexandria's breath came fast. Miller was dead. Someone had taken him out before he could talk. Someone inside the system had orchestrated this, and Alexandria was next. The cost of truth. The smell of gunpowder still lingered in the air as the courtroom descended into chaos. Security officers scrambled to evacuate the crowd while others searched for the shooter. The gunshots had come from outside, a sniper. And now, Miller was dead. His lifeless body slumped forward against the defendant's table, his blood seeping into the polished wood. His last words echoed in Alexandria's mind. "They're going to kill me anyway." Whoever they were, they had just silenced a key witness in the most high-profile police corruption case the city had ever seen. And if Miller had been a loose end, Alexandria was next. The escape. Agent Caldwell grabbed Alexandria by the arm, her grip firm. "We need to move. Now." "But," Alexandria started. "Judge, Movi." Caldwell practically dragged her through the side exit as armed officers covered their retreat. The moment they stepped into the back hallway, the sound of shattering glass filled the air. More gunshots. "Get her to the car." Caldwell barked at two agents who had been waiting in the corridor. Alexandria barely had time to react before she was ushered down the emergency stairwell, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every step echoed with urgency. By the time they reached the underground garage, the SUV was already waiting, its engine rumbling. Caldwell shoved her inside before slamming the door shut behind them. The vehicle lurched forward, speeding toward the exit. Alexandria turned to Caldwell, her breath coming in fast. Miller was our best lead. And now he's dead, Caldwell finished grimly, pressing a hand to her earpiece. We've got teams searching the rooftops, but my guess, the shooter is already gone. Alexandria gritted her teeth. Whoever had done this had been waiting, watching. The moment Miller was about to talk, they took him out. That meant one thing. Someone on the inside was feeding information to Garner's network. And that made the situation even more dangerous. A city on edge. By the time Alexandria arrived at the FBI's secure safe house, the city was already in an uproar. News channels were blaring headlines. Breaking NEODIOS. Sniper EXEQTEs YTNESS in high-profile POLAC CUR RUPTION CAC. ESCALATINGTNSIONs as city de manges justice. Who is BAINDTATATCK? Crowds had gathered outside the courthouse, demanding answers. Protesters carried signs calling for police reform, while others shouted Alexandria's name. Judge Carter, stay strong. Justice for the victims. No more corruption. But mixed within the cries for justice were darker messages. Anonymous threats. A city divided. And at the center of it all, her. The power behind the badge. Inside the secure location, Alexandria sat across from Caldwell and a team of FBI analysts, her hands clenched into fists. This isn't just about Miller or Daniels, she said. This is a system, and whoever is behind it is willing to kill to keep their power. Caldwell nodded, sliding a thick file across the table, which is why we need to talk about Deputy Chief Garner. Alexandria flipped through the file. Surveillance photos, financial transactions, witness statements. This is what we know, Caldwell began. Garner isn't just running a network of corrupt cops. He's running an entire operation. Alexandria's eyes scanned the documents. Operation. Caldwell exhaled. Extortion. Bribery. Money laundering. And it goes beyond just stopping black drivers in certain neighborhoods. She pointed to a section in the file. We believe he has ties to organized crime. Drug traffickers, arms dealers, people who benefit from looking the other way. Alexandria felt a cold chill. If we take down Garner, Caldwell continued, we don't just take down a dirty cop. We take down an entire empire. And that made Alexandria more dangerous than ever. The leak. An hour later, Alexandria sat alone in the safe house's dimly lit living room, the weight of the day pressing down on her. Miller was dead. Garner's operation was bigger than she thought, and now she was the primary target. Her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. You're in over your head, Judge. Walk away before you don't have a choice. She exhaled slowly, gripping the device tighter. Then, another buzz. This time, it was Caldwell. We have a problem. Caldwell's voice was tight. There's been a leak. Someone inside the department just tipped off Garner's network that we're coming for them. Alexandria's blood ran cold. So what does that mean? It means, Caldwell said grimly, Garner is about to disappear. The raid. Within an hour, a full FBI strike team was mobilized. SWAT officers, federal agents, armored vehicles, all converging on Garner's estate. Helicopters roared overhead. Spotlights flooded the sprawling mansion. FBI. Caldwell's voice blared through a megaphone. Garner, come out with your hands up. Silence. Then, gunfire. Shots fired. An agent yelled. The air erupted into chaos as gunmen opened fire from the windows, forcing the FBI team to take cover. Garner had planned for this. He wasn't going down without a fight. Inside the SUV, Alexandria clutched the seatbelt, watching the scene unfold. This isn't just a bust. It's a war. Caldwell glanced at her. That's what happens when you try to dismantle a kingdom. A massive explosion rocked the estate, sending flames shooting into the night sky. Garner was burning the evidence. "Move in. Move in," Caldwell ordered. The agents stormed the compound, sweeping the rooms, clearing out the resistance. Within minutes, Alexandria saw him. Garner, being dragged out in cuffs. His once confident smirk was gone. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes wild. He saw Alexandria standing near the perimeter, and for a brief moment, his lips curled into something almost amused. "You think this is over?" he called, his voice dripping with venom. Alexandria met his gaze, her spine straight. "No," she said, "I think this is just the beginning." The final threat. Hours later, back at the safe house, Alexandria sat alone, staring at the wall. Garner was in custody. His empire was crumbling. But something still didn't sit right. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. Unknown number. Garner was never the top. "You're fighting a war you can't win." A cold chill swept over her. Before she could react, the power in the safe house cut out. Darkness swallowed the room. Her heart pounded. Then, a single sound. Footsteps. Inside the house. She wasn't alone. The deeper threat. The silence in the safe house was suffocating. The only sound was the faint hum of Alexandria's own breath, steady yet sharp with tension. The power had gone out. And now, someone was inside. The darkness pressed in around her, but she knew better than to move blindly. Instead, she listened. A shift in the air. A floorboard creaking. Whoever it was, they were close. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she reached for her phone, fingers tightening around the device. The screen was dark, useless. The outage had cut the signal. A slow exhale. Then, a voice. "You should have walked away, Judge." Low, cold, calculated. Alexandria's grip on her phone tightened. "If you've come to kill me," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, "you should have done it already." A chuckle. "Oh, I will. But first, you're going to listen." A shadow shifted across the room, a figure barely visible in the dim emergency lighting filtering through the blinds. Alexandria forced herself to remain still. No sudden movements. No fear. The intruder took a step closer. Garner was a pawn. You think you've won because he's in cuffs. Because his little network is falling apart. The man let out a soft, mocking laugh. "This is bigger than you. Bigger than him." Alexandria's mind raced. Bigger than Garner. If what he was saying was true, then the corruption in the department wasn't just about Garner's operation. It was about something higher. Something systemic. "Who are you?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. "And why are you telling me this?" The intruder didn't answer. Instead, he took another step forward, the dim light catching the outline of a silencer attached to a pistol in his hand. Alexandria tensed. Then, a crash. The front door burst open. A flood of tactical lights blazed through the darkness. "FBI. Hands up." The intruder spun, firing 2 silenced shots toward the doorway. Agents returned fire. Alexandria dove to the floor just as the gunman bolted toward the back of the house, bullets whizzing past. The room erupted into chaos as agents stormed in, weapons drawn. "Secure the judge." Caldwell's voice cut through the noise. A pair of agents grabbed Alexandria, pulling her toward the doorway. Behind her, the gunman was already gone. The warning. An hour later, Alexandria sat in the dimly lit FBI office, a cup of untouched coffee in front of her. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The intruder had escaped. The cameras outside the safe house had been disabled. Whoever he was, he had planned this well. But it wasn't just the attack that unsettled her. It was his words. "Garner was a pawn. This is bigger than you." Across from her, Caldwell studied her carefully. "You okay?" Alexandria let out a slow breath. No. Caldwell leaned back. He could have killed you. Instead, he gave you a message. A warning, Alexandria corrected. Caldwell nodded. Which means he, whoever he is, wants you alive long enough to understand what you're up against. Alexandria's stomach twisted. Which is? Caldwell sighed. We don't know yet, but we need to find out. Fast. She reached into a folder and pulled out a small evidence bag. Inside was a black poker chip with a red symbol on it, an 8-pointed star. We found this in the safe house after the attack, Caldwell explained. We ran it through every database we have. Nothing. Alexandria frowned. You think it's a calling card? Caldwell shrugged. I think it's a message. A new kind of fear settled in Alexandria's gut. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was a game. And someone very powerful had just made their next move. Garner's last play. The next morning, Alexandria returned to the courthouse under the tightest security detail she had ever experienced. Armed federal agents flanked her on all sides. She wasn't safe. Not even here. By now, Garner's arrest had set the city on fire. Some saw him as the villain. Others, the ones who had benefited from his protection, called him a martyr. But Garner himself. Garner was waiting. For her. As Alexandria entered the holding facility beneath the courthouse, 2 guards escorted her into a dimly lit interrogation room. Behind the glass, Garner sat, shackled to the table, wearing a prison jumpsuit. Yet, despite the cuffs on his wrists, he still grinned like a man who held all the power in the room. Judge Carter, he drawled, leaning back in his chair. To what do I owe the pleasure? Alexandria sat across from him, folding her hands. Who tried to have me killed last night? Garner's grin widened. Oh, sweetheart, he chuckled. You really think I'd tell you that? Her fingers tightened. You don't have many options left, Deputy Chief. Garner's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. You still think this is about me, he mused. That I'm the top of the pyramid. Alexandria's gut tightened. She remained silent. Garner leaned forward, his eyes dark. What's coming, Judge Carter? He let out a low chuckle. You won't see it until it's too late. Her mouth went dry. What does that mean? Garner tilted his head. You don't stop an infection by cutting off the arm. You stop it by going after the heart. He leaned even closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You're still looking in the wrong place. The words sent a chill down Alexandria's spine. Because for the first time since this all started, she realized something terrifying. Garner wasn't bluffing. He wasn't scared of going to prison. Because whoever was really in charge, they were still out there. And they were already making their next move. Beneath the surface, the air in the interrogation room was heavy with tension. Garner's words lingered. You're still looking in the wrong place. Alexandria Carter had spent years fighting for justice. She had faced corrupt officers, broken systems, and countless obstacles. But now, this was different. This wasn't just about row cops. This wasn't just about Deputy Chief Garner. This was bigger. And if she didn't figure out who was really in control, she wouldn't live long enough to find out. A game of power. Alexandria studied Garner carefully. He had always been arrogant, a man who thrived on power. But now he wasn't worried. Despite the cuffs, despite the charges, despite everything, he wasn't acting like a man who had lost. He was acting like a man who knew something she didn't. Alexandria leaned forward, keeping her voice even. If you're not the top of the chain, then who is? Garner chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, Judge, you really think I'd give you that answer? She held his gaze. You don't have a choice. Garner smirked. I always have a choice. And right now, my choice is to watch you chase ghosts. A slow, creeping frustration built in her chest. She needed leverage. Something to make him talk. Before she could speak again, the door swung open. Agent Caldwell walked in, her expression unreadable. Judge Carter, a word. Alexandria frowned but rose, stepping outside with Caldwell. What is it? Caldwell's voice was low. Garner's stalling. He's waiting for something. Or someone. Alexandria's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Caldwell hesitated. Then she handed Alexandria her phone. A new message flashed on the screen. Check your courthouse security. You're compromised. Alexandria's pulse spiked. Who sent this? She demanded. Caldwell exhaled. We don't know. But if someone is telling us to check our security, it means. A loud boom shook the building. An explosion. The courthouse breach. The hallways erupted into chaos. Shouts, footsteps, alarm bells ringing. Alexandria barely had time to react before Caldwell grabbed her arm. Move. They'd rushed down the corridor, agents flooding past them. Another explosion ripped through the lower level of the courthouse, sending debris cascading down from the ceiling. Smoke billowed through the halls. Security radios crackled with panic. Shots fired. We have multiple hostiles inside. Alexandria's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a bomb. This was a coordinated attack. Caldwell pressed her earpiece. Get Garner secured. Do not let anyone near him. A voice came through. Too late. He's gone. Alexandria's blood ran cold. Garner had escaped. A vanishing act. Minutes later, Alexandria and Caldwell stood in the wreckage of the interrogation room. The steel shackles that had bound Garner to the table. Cut. The 2 guards assigned to watch him. Dead. The surveillance cameras. Offline. It was too precise. Too perfect. This was planned, Alexandria muttered. Caldwell cursed under her breath. Who the hell could pull this off inside a federal facility? A deep dread settled in Alexandria's gut. This wasn't an outside attack. This was an inside job. The shadow organization. Back at the FBI field office, Alexandria paced the room, her mind racing. Garner had warned her. He had practically mocked her. She should have seen this coming. Caldwell sat at the desk, sifting through classified files. We need to figure out where Garner would go, she said. Alexandria shook her head. Garner isn't running. He doesn't need to. Caldwell looked up. What do you mean? Alexandria turned, eyes burning with realization. He's not on the run, she said. He's going back to whoever protected him. Caldwell frowned. So we track his financials. Alexandria nodded. His money, his connections, his real power. Caldwell exhaled. All right, let's dig. The 2 of them worked for hours. And then, they found it. A series of hidden accounts. Money laundering operations disguised as city-funded programs. Millions of dollars funneled through a network that led to a single name. Councilman Richard Halstead. Alexandria's breath hitched. Halstead wasn't just a politician. He was one of the most powerful men in the city. And now, he was their prime suspect. The meeting. Hours later, Alexandria stood in the grand office of Councilman Richard Halstead. The room was pristine. Expensive leather chairs. A skyline view of the city. Halstead himself sat behind a massive desk, his smile practiced. Calculated. Judge Carter, he greeted, his voice smooth. To what do I owe the pleasure? Alexandria sat, placing a file on his desk. Deputy Chief Garner escaped federal custody today. Halstead raised an eyebrow. How unfortunate. Alexandria didn't blink. We traced his finances, and they led to you. Silence. Then, a slow smirk. Careful, Judge, Halstead murmured. You're playing in dangerous waters. Alexandria's jaw tightened. So it's true, then. You're the one protecting him, funding him, giving him the power to run his network. Halstead exhaled, leaning back in his chair. You've got it all wrong. Do I? Halstead chuckled. You think I run this city? He shook his head. I'm just another piece on the board. Alexandria frowned. Then who's at the top? Halstead's smirk faded. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear. "Walk away, Judge Carter," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't want to meet the people who really run things." Alexandria's pulse spiked. This wasn't just about corruption anymore. This was something much darker, a system so embedded in power that even a man like Halstead feared it. She leaned forward. "I'm not walking away." Halstead sighed. "Then you won't live long enough to regret it." The assassination attempt. That night, as Alexandria left the courthouse under heavy security, a black SUV sped toward them. "Gun," someone yelled. A spray of bullets erupted. Alexandria dove for cover. Caldwell returned fire. Screams. Chaos. A bullet whizzed past Alexandria's head. The SUV screeched away. As Alexandria pulled herself up, heart hammering, Caldwell grabbed her by the shoulders. "Judge, listen to me," she said, voice urgent. "Whoever we're up against, they're more powerful than we thought. This isn't just about Garner. It's about the entire system." Alexandria clenched her fists. Then she turned to Caldwell. "We bring them down. No matter how high this went. The final reckoning." The scent of burnt rubber and gunpowder still lingered in the air as Alexandria Carter was rushed into a secure FBI facility. The assassination attempt had failed, but the message had been clear. She wasn't supposed to survive the night. Caldwell paced across the briefing room, her face tight with frustration as she barked orders into her phone. The FBI was locking down the city, combing through surveillance footage, but Alexandria already knew how this worked. Whoever was behind this had planned it too well. They wouldn't leave loose ends. They wouldn't be found unless she made them come to her. A city gripped by fear. The media had already caught wind of the attempt on Alexandria's life. Breaking any audios. Attempted assassination on Judge Alexandria Carter. City on EDG as Kior UPTYON investigation. Tuorens D. Adlai. Who is trying to silence justice? The streets outside the courthouse were flooded with protesters. Some carried signs demanding justice. Others carried messages of fear. "Stay strong, Judge Carter. Expose them all. The system will never change." The entire city was watching. And that meant the people pulling the strings, the ones behind Garner, behind Halstead, behind the entire network of corruption, were desperate. Because now, everyone knew. The informant. It was nearly midnight when Caldwell pulled Alexandria aside. Her face was grim. "We just got a hit," she said. "Someone wants to talk." Alexandria straightened. "Who?" Caldwell hesitated. "An anonymous contact. Said they have proof that Halstead isn't the real leader, that there's someone higher." Alexandria's stomach tightened. "Where's the meeting?" she asked. Caldwell exhaled. "It's risky. We can't trust anyone right now." "I don't have time for caution," Alexandria said. "Whoever this is, they might be our last shot at finding out who's really behind this." Caldwell nodded reluctantly. "All right. We're setting up a secure meeting location, but if anything goes wrong, we pull out immediately." Alexandria nodded. Agreed. But she already knew there was no pulling out. This was the endgame. The meeting. The rendezvous point was a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Dark. Isolated. The perfect place for a trap. Alexandria sat in an armored SUV, watching through tinted windows as the FBI prepared the scene. Agents positioned themselves strategically. Snipers on the rooftops, drones circling overhead. "Whoever this is," Caldwell muttered, "they better be worth it." Then, a car pulled up. A lone figure stepped out. A woman wrapped in a long coat, her hood pulled up. She moved with caution, looking over her shoulder as if she expected to be followed. Caldwell's earpiece crackled. No weapons detected, but she's nervous. Alexandria took a deep breath. "Let's go." She stepped out of the vehicle, Caldwell beside her. The woman flinched, then turned to face them fully. When she pulled down her hood, Alexandria's breath caught. It was Detective Rachel Vaughn, a name she hadn't heard in years. "You've got to be kidding me," Caldwell muttered. Vaughn had once been a rising star in the department, until she disappeared 5 years ago. Rumors said she had been forced out. Others said she had gone rogue. But now here she was, alive and terrified. The truth beneath the surface. "I don't have much time," Vaughn said, glancing around. "They know I'm here. I guarantee someone's watching us right now." Alexandria folded her arms. "Then talk fast." Vaughn exhaled. "Garner, Halstead, the entire police corruption ring. They're just enforcers." "Enforcers for who?" Alexandria pressed. Vaughn hesitated. "You ever heard of the syndicate?" Caldwell's face darkened. "That's a conspiracy theory." Vaughn shook her head. "No, it's real. It's been running this city for decades. The police department, the city council, the courts. They own it all." Alexandria felt a cold dread. "You're saying everything. The profiling, the illegal stops, the bribes. It's all been part of a larger operation." Vaughn nodded. "The syndicate doesn't care about justice. They care about control. They decide who gets prosecuted, who gets protected, who lives and who." A gunshot. Vaughn's body jerked violently. Blood sprayed into the cold night air. Alexandria barely had time to react before Caldwell grabbed her, shoving her behind cover. "Sniper!" an agent yelled. Another shot rang out. The SUV's windows shattered. FBI agents returned fire. But Vaughn was already dying. Alexandria rushed to her, pressing down on the wound. Blood pooled between her fingers. "Stay with me," Alexandria pleaded. Vaughn choked, her body trembling. Her lips moved. Alexandria leaned in, her final words barely a whisper. "The name. Look for the name." "Adler." Her body went still. Alexandria froze. Then her blood ran cold, because she knew that name. The most powerful man in the city. Back at the FBI field office, Alexandria sat in stunned silence. Adler, as in Daniel Adler, the mayor, the most powerful man in the city, a man who had built his career on a platform of justice reform, a man who had publicly condemned police misconduct, a man who had secretly controlled it all. Caldwell broke the silence. If Vaughn was right, then we're not dealing with just corruption. We're dealing with a shadow government. Alexandria clenched her fists. And the mayor is at the center of it. They had thought Garner was the top of the chain. They had thought Halstead was the puppet master. But the real power, it was sitting in City Hall. And now, he knew they were coming. The final battle. Alexandria looked at Caldwell. "We need to move on Adler. Now." Caldwell hesitated. "Judge, this isn't just an arrest. This is a coup. If we go after Adler, we need airtight evidence. If we don't, he'll crush us before we can blink." Alexandria's eyes burned with determination. "Then we expose him. We make sure the whole city sees what he's done." Caldwell exhaled, then nodded. "All right. Then let's take this bastard down." The war for the city had just reached its peak, and Alexandria Carter was ready for the final fight.